Hi, and thank you for joining me for this week's Testimony Tuesday. So last week I had contemplated sharing this testimony, and at the last minute the Lord sent me in a totally different direction and had me share something completely different, as he does and reserves the right to do. But he did make it obvious and evident to me why he had me wait for the testimony that I'm going to share today. So I have shared before that I deliver medication for a pharmacy that services long-term care, nursing facilities, home pluses, just that long-term care environment. And last Thursday, as I went to deliver medication at one of the smaller homes that I've been delivering to over the last few years, I was met at the door by the med aide to sign for the medications, and she came out and she said, "Have you heard the news?" And in my spirit, I knew immediately what she was about to share with me, and it was confirmed as she said, Art passed away yesterday morning. And Art was my buddy. He had become, in many ways, like a surrogate grandfather to me. I met Art just a few years ago, shortly after COVID started, when my job role could no longer go into the hospitals and meet with patients there. So I was in a position that was full remote. So I would deliver medication sometimes in the evenings or the weekends, or just, at random times to help with that as I could. And so that's how I got to know Art. And he was my buddy because he would, there's not many that will sit outside a lot. And when I say sit outside, like in the front of the facility, and this was a small facility where he was. And so it got to be that if the weather was, I would say, 80 or higher, most days Art would be outside. So he and I developed a friendship where, I'd ring the doorbell and wait for the staff member to come to sign for meds, and he'd be sitting in his little chair right beside the door. And we would just start shooting the breeze and talking. And so over the years, I got to know Art very well. The beautiful thing about the relationship that we developed was that we very openly spoke of the Lord and spoke about each other's lives. And I got to know so many things about him. Art had told me about the love of his life that he had been married to for 60 years. They had quite a few children, and he had been a farmer, was his primary love and role as far as work. And then much later on in their lives, he had told me when his wife had gotten ill. I don't remember if she had cancer or dementia or something, but she had gotten ill in some way. And he told me that he had become a nurse's aide so that he could be with her all the time and help take care of her. And just so sweet. My friend loved the Lord. We would talk about the things of God. We would talk about how cool it was going to be when we were both in heaven someday, to reminisce about how we knew each other on earth and how we used to talk. He loved puzzles. He always was doing puzzles. And it was neat because when I found that out about him, I began to have just such a desire to bring light and joy into his life, because he brought so much light and joy into my life. And just kind of an unexpected way. We go about our days and we get into our routines with work and life and sports or whatever it is that we do. And sometimes we don't realize when it's happening that God has placed someone in our life just to kind of minister to us and encourage us in different seasons. And we don't always recognize it when it's happening. And then sometimes we do start to recognize it, and then this person becomes a significant person in our lives. And it's just a beautiful thing how the Lord orchestrates timing and seasons and people and circumstances. And there's so much beauty in that. But I started because it was such a joy for me to see, I would at the facility that he lived in, like I would have to turn onto a street, and there actually were several facilities in this one area, and so I'd always go in the direction of his first. And when I would turn in the parking lot, my eyes would always go to his building to see if Art was sitting out front that day. And then more recently, I've been delivering, at the lunchtime hours, and then also in the evening. And I'd rarely see him out in the evenings. So usually it'd be like lunchtime, or on a Saturday. And so my eyes would always go to Art to see if he was there and if I'd get to see my little friend, for the day. And it was just he was such a light in my day. And so with this kindred relationship that we started building, I found out he loved puzzles. And so his birthday came around in June, and got him some puzzles, and he'd sit out there sometimes, and the staff was great. I mean, they would monitor him for heat, and he'd always have water and something to keep him cool, and he'd be sitting in the shade. But he'd be out there on warm days. And so I got him a little like cooling thing for his neck, because sometimes he'd just be passed out, like just kind of laying there dozing off, and I'd sneak the meds in around him, or he'd wake. Some of you have seen I leave the little Jesuses in random places, and sometimes if he wouldn't be out there, I'd leave a little Jesus, right on the bricks where when he would sit, it'd be about eye level, so he'd find a little Jesus and know that I was there. And sometimes we would hold hands and we would pray together. And I'll never forget this last June. He wasn't out on his birthday, and I had asked when I came to give meds, I was like, how's Art doing? They're like, oh, he's good. He's just in his room working on his puzzle. And I said, well, I have a little something for him. Can I bring it in? And they're like, oh yeah, come on in. So I brought him a little gift, and he was so sweet. And he was in his bed, just, sitting back in his bed, and he gets up. He got up out of his bed to stand and give me a hug, and told me, I'll never forget this. He told me that he said, you and I are putting each other's lives to encourage each other. And it was so beautiful, and it was so amazing. And I will always love and cherish this friend of mine. And the sweet thing with Art, especially for me personally, was that, my grandpa, he passed in June, the year after COVID started. And the timing of when Art came into my life was in that season of transition between losing my grandfather, my biological grandfather, and meeting him. And so in some ways, and certainly, looking back this last week and thinking about him, and as I continue to deliver meds each day, and my heart just kind of stings a little bit because I don't see him. I know where he is, and I'm so happy for him, and he is just in such glory, and just so happy, and I'm so happy for him. First and foremost, I am so happy for him, and I'm so happy he's back with his wife. I'm so happy that he's with Jesus, that he had the gift and just blessing of passing in his sleep. And, I can't think of a better way to go meet the Lord is that way. So many beautiful things about that whole beautiful thing that God did with him in my life. And I know we'll get to talk about that again someday, and I look forward to that. He loved ice cream. I would tell him, like, when his son Terry would come and pick him up, and he had such a good son and good family. And I found his obituary, and it said his children will remember him, and this is so beautiful. His children will remember him as consistent, compassionate, Christ-like, a tender-hearted man of fervent prayer who lived his faith in every aspect of life. And that is the Art that I knew in just the last few years. Just 100%, they nailed it. Just beautiful. You know, the word appointed means a time or a place that is designated and determined beforehand. And we hear the phrase to appointed time. And so appointed time, the Hebrew verb, there's a word I'm not going to even try to pronounce, but it's a Hebrew verb, and it means to meet. And then also appointed times are referred to in scriptural sense as like appointed times that God had given the people of Israel as designated, consecrated time to be with the Lord in celebration of feasts and festivals. And the focus of those gatherings was to be on God. And so the day that I got the news last Thursday that Art had passed the day before, as soon as I finished that encounter with the med aide who told me about him passing, I got back to my car, and it just kind of hit me then, and I felt the Lord speak appointed times. And then I knew, it's so funny how he works, then I knew that was the reason why he wasn't having me share the I love you story quite yet. Art would call me his sweetheart when I'd come and the med aides come out. He'd be like, "There's my sweetheart." And he would tell me regularly, "I love you." And I remember the first time he said that to me, it just melted my heart. And I was like, "I love you too, Art." And he would say, "I love you, honey. I love you." And he's such a light in my life. It's so beautiful. But the I love you story that I would have told had I told the testimony last week had to do with my grandma. She passed at last September 30th of last year, so 2023. And my mom had been saying to me pretty regularly the last few months of my grandma's life, because she was declining in health and in her mentation, and of course her physical abilities, so she was requiring much more help. And actually she had gone from living independently to moving in with my aunt. And my mom had said, "Azure, you need to go see grandma. You need to go see grandma. Take the time to go see grandma." And she'd been saying it and saying it. And in my world at that time, I was working 2 jobs and just so ran thin in how I was living life and what my priorities were, that I didn't make it a priority to go see my grandma as much as I should have in the last season of her life. And I am the kind of person that when I was working in corporate America, I hated taking days off, so I would rarely take any time off. So for whatever reason, and I don't remember why, well, I know now why, but I had taken off a Friday, it was a Thursday or Friday or a couple days that September last year. And I texted my aunt who had moved my grandma in with her the night before, the afternoon before, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to be off tomorrow. Would it be okay if I come visit grandma in the morning?" And she said, "Yeah, we'll see how she does." I think they'd gone to the senior fair or the senior expo or something. And so she had had a big day and was kind of worn out. So she's like, touch base with me in the morning. And so the morning of the 29th, which I had my day off that day, I reached out and she said, "Yeah, come on over." And so I went over to my aunt's house about 9:15, 9:30 in the morning, and ended up visiting with my grandma and visiting with my aunt. This is my little therapy dog. He knows when I'm sad. Visiting with grandma and just spending actually just a few hours with her that morning before I went in to do some things. And I'll never forget this, because as I was getting ready to leave, my grandma wanted to go lay down in the bed, and so my aunt had helped her get in bed, and I went in to say goodbye to my grandma, and as I leaned down to give her a hug and a kiss, she said, "I love you," and I said, "I love you too, Grandma," and I said goodbye to my aunt and left. And that night, around 11 o'clock at night, my aunt texted me and said that the EMS was coming to get my grandma because she'd had a little bit of a fall, and they wanted to take her in to get her checked out. And by that morning, my grandma had passed away. So it was so bittersweet in the sense that it happened very fast, but I was so grateful that, my mom had been saying, "Go visit grandma, go visit grandma, go visit grandma." And I had not done it. And then thankfully, the Lord in his kindness allowed me to have that last day off and to put it on my heart to go see my grandma and to tell her I loved her one more time, and to hear her say that to me before she would pass within that next 24-hour time period. So it was just sweet. And I'm so grateful for that. The book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 3, and of course these dogs are going to get wild. In chapter 3, he says, "There's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain." And it goes on, but I'll stop there because, times and appointed times, we don't know the time that we have. And I'll tell you, even this week, I've been seeing even younger people, acquaintances, friends of friends who have passed this week, and we just never know the time that we do have for ourselves or with others, friends or family on this side of heaven. So I just want to encourage you with that, and just tell you that even in sad and tender experiences and the loss of friends and loved ones, from the earthly realm, on this side of heaven, the Lord is still so sweet and still so good in that. And you just never know who he's going to put in your life for what season or for how long. But there's so much beauty in how the Lord just sweetly just orchestrates all timing and circumstances to bring people together that he knows need each other for various reasons. So anyways, I hope this testimony encourages you. I would encourage you, if there's someone that has come to your mind or heart that you haven't spent time with, or that you need to reach out and touch or tell you love them, do that today. Don't wait, because life is short and we don't know when our appointed times are. So anyways, thank you for joining me this week, and I'll see you next week.